He's always got the time.
Is that because of his... I can't say that. He's got a watch. Have the size of his
Zoom
watch.
into his watch. It's a great watch, but he's always got the time.
For many Melbourne supporters, this guest is synonymous with one of the club's greatest moments in recent memory. But his story extends far beyond that running goal in 2018. In this episode of The Watch, we dissect the highs and the lows of life as an AFL player. Introducing Mitch Hannan. Mitch, thanks very much for coming on the pod. Everyone I've told so far has said, I love Mitch Hannan. So it's a really good sign. I think we've got a good guest here. Appreciate your time.
No worries, Benny. Thanks for having me.
Long time no see. What have you been up to since the last time we saw you on a footy field?
Yeah, it's probably been about 12 months now. Life changes dramatically when you leave the AFL world. For me, the initial part was something I know how to do well, which is rehab. Finished my time with an Achilles rupture, so I was actually in a moon boot for about 3 months, rolling around on one of those knee scooters, and yeah, trying to sort of find my feet a little bit, trying to work out what's next, and kind of fold into the professional world. So,
how did you go rehabbing outside of the professional environment? Obviously, there's such a good pathway to getting better when you're at an AFL club. Obviously, getting to the end of your time at a team and then having to keep doing it couldn't have been as easy.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. For me, like, you get so used to the footy environment where you kind of get your hand held through all sorts of injuries, and then I found myself on the other side of it with probably one of the most significant ones I've had. And for me, I just kind of wanted to align myself with a footy club just so I could try and get that level of support. So I've been spending my time down at North Melbourne's VFL, and there's some really good physios down there. And then also seeing Shane O'Sullivan, who was one of the physios at the Dogs, who'd also left as well at his clinic. So I really wanted to make sure, just from what I'd heard from anyone that's done an Achilles, my dad had done an Achilles as well back in the day playing cricket, and he sort of gave me all the sort of warning signs to look out for, and one of them was making sure you do the right sort of rehab for it. So yeah, I'm at the back end of it now. I've done 12 months, and yeah, I'm glad it's sort of all over.
How have you going from being an AFL player to not only not being in the system, but not being able to actually play at all? A lot of people, I'm guessing, go and play local footy. You've had a complete cut-off from the game. How's that been?
Yeah, it was really challenging at the start. You remain really close with some of the guys that you played with, and then you sort of see them roll into a pre-season and then roll into games. And normally that would coincide with probably me playing footy as well, but I knew I had my name sort of with a line through it for most of the year. And it was tough, but I wanted to make sure I stayed involved in footy, so I got one of the young draftees to come live with me. So I got young Riley Sanders at my place for the last sort of 12 months or so, and sort of helping him sort of ride the ups and downs of the footy world. And then also, like I said earlier, sort of staying involved with North Melbourne's VFL. That sort of allowed me to kind of, without going sort of cold turkey on footy as you get older, sort of stay involved, do a little bit of development coaching with the young group, which is just really nice to be able to give back, actually, because that's how my football journey started, was in that VFL program.
How have you gone with Riley? Have you been able to help him at all, or what's your relationship been like? Yeah,
it's been great. I've only got a small house, so it's close quarters in there. But, geez, you sort of realise how quick you sort of do grow up, because for me, I'm 30 now, but I sort of feel like I'm still young and vibrant and got lots of energy. He just has, to be honest, like a lot of these things, just so many questions about, like, where does this go? How do I do this? What was your experience during the game? And a few of them are valid, and a few of them I'm like, geez, it really reminds me how young they are. But it's good. I feel like he keeps me young. He keeps me in tune with what's happening at the footy club. For his age, he's a really sort of upbeat and mature guy as well. And you can tell he's just got like a thirst to learn as well. So he's always sort of asking me questions, which kind of makes me feel nice. That sort of being able to sort of help him out a little bit. So
you touched on your 30, which you're still at a good age to probably play football once you get your body right. Is there any hunger still to get back out there?
To be honest, it's a question I've been asking myself all year. I'm a little bit on the fence about it, to be honest. I still love the game of football, and it's been a big part of my life for sort of professionally for about 7 years, but sort of playing it obviously since I was about 11 or 12. But it's a brutal game, and it takes a toll on you physically, mentally, the whole shebang. And there's a part of me that during this year as well has really, really enjoyed sort of taking the foot off the pedal a little bit, being able to sit back and watch and sort of, even though I had to do my rehab through my Achilles, the rest of my body's been feeling great. So I've still got a little bit of thinking to do in regards to what's next. If I do come back to playing footy, it'll be for the right reasons. I just want to play with some mates and to have fun. But in regards to trying to get to the top level again, I'm more than happy to start sort of folding into a different phase of my life. So love the game, just not sure whether or not where or if I do play.
We'll talk a little bit about your time at the top level. I'm guessing most people say to you their favourite moment of your career is the Elimination Final 2018. How often do you get asked about that?
All the time. Yeah. So for anyone that sort of is a Melbourne supporter or a football fan in general, if they've got something to say to me, that's the first thing that comes up. I even had a sort of an instance of that happening just recently when I started my first job outside of football. Was on a construction site, and it was just getting brought up left, right, and centre. It even got played in one of the meetings just for people to sort of like have a watch. And yeah, it's interesting because at the time, like, you don't really realise the significance it has. For me, it was just I'd won a final, and how good Melbourne are sort of like on the journey to hopefully playing in a grand final, and you have your family and your friends around you. But it's not really for quite a few years you realise how special something like that is. So.
We're going to talk about it one more time, but are you sick of talking about it?
No, I'm more than happy to talk about it. It's when I think about my football journey, it's one of my fondest memories is being able to experience a crowd, an atmosphere, and the elation that it brought all the fans and my friends and family as well. So, no, I love talking about it.
I do have the vision here, so we can watch it as we do. One of the big parts of it is BT's commentary. I know people just yell the 50, 40, 30 so much. Is that something you hear often?
Yeah, obviously when my friends reference it or something like that, I can just hear it. I actually could hear it from Sparks probably the most, the man that was probably demanding the ball at that time. Just a 50, 40, 30, BT screaming it as I'm sort of running down the wing. But yeah, really special moment, and all happens really quickly.
Hannan can go all the way, one bounce, 50, 40, 30, 20, 15, closing, goal! Hannan's got it for the Demons!
You sort of look up, the field is open. What was going through your mind at that point?
Oh, you're heavily fatigued at that point. It's the fourth quarter. Yeah, I turn around. I remember sort of not seeing the space in front of me and just being like, right, I've got a bounce or a few of them ahead of me. First of one, just don't stuff this up. So I did one of those little awkward bounces where you just kind of make sure it doesn't disappear back over your head. Then you sort of find your stride and you start to run a little bit. And I've always considered myself a pretty unselfish sort of player. And I remember seeing Sparks in particular on my inside, and I was so ready to give it to him. And then I kind of had the opposition player just kind of hedging in between, not really making a decision. And then I just sort of had the split second decision where I'm like, look, I'm just going to have a stab at this. And thankfully enough, it sort of went straight through the guts.
The game in itself was such an important one for the club. Obviously, Melbourne hadn't played finals in 12 years. What was the build-up to that like?
Yeah, we had if we talk about the year before, we just missed out on the 8. And
that loss to Collingwood
yeah,
last game.
That's right. And for me, that was my first year at the club. So all the history of the Melbourne Football Club is new to me, and the heartache of not playing finals and all those years where they were just sort of having 100-point losses and so forth. I'd heard about it. I hadn't experienced it. For me, I'd come off the back of a VFL Grand Final. So all I sort of knew was winning. And it was great to sort of be on that journey with the club as they started ascending in the right direction again. But yeah, I remember vividly going over to West Coast. It was second last, maybe home and away game, beating them over there, and just thinking we're on here, we're building something special. And then rolling into my first final, 97,000. Rolling into my second final against Hawthorn, 97,000. And just kind of thinking at the time, it was special but kind of normal. I'd play footy now, this is what you get. But in hindsight, every kid dreams of playing in front of that many people, let alone winning them. And then lo and behold, we go on to versus West Coast over in Perth, thinking we're a very good chance to win here, and just get absolutely annihilated.
Every single one of those games is a story in itself. The West Coast trip, that must have, the trip home, how was that?
From the final?
Yeah, from the prelim against West Coast.
Oh, look. That was a game that we never really reviewed in the end. It's almost never got spoken about again, and it probably showed the year after as we finished second bottom on the ladder, to be honest. But it's so disappointing. We went over there with seriously high hopes, but I think looking back on it, we probably were playing above our means for quite a lot of that year. And we were sort of riding the spirit and what you can create internally. but on sheer talent, like we were playing above our means. So we got beaten by a better side, a team that went on to win the grand final. Extremely disappointing, but it's nevertheless something like really great to experience as a football club.
That's a loud stadium to play at, all going one way. Obviously, get off to a bad start, concede a couple, and it sort of piles on. What was it like out there?
Oh, it's hostile. Like, you think about the MCG, and everyone says, what's 98,000 like? But you often got competing crowds. But West Coast Optus Stadium is an acoustically designed stadium that is just like meant for concerts and whatnot, with probably a 95% fan base of West Coast supporters in it, and it's just like echoing around the field. And it's one of those grounds where, especially big games like that in a prelim, you've got a teammate 10 metres away from you, and it's like you're doing sign language. Like, you can't hear anything that's coming out of his mouth. You're pointing, trying to sort of get some authority in terms of like directing the game, but it's just white noise a lot of the time. It's it's a serious experience playing over there.
How early into that game did you think, we're cooked, we're no chance here?
As a player in the forward line, you kind of get a front row seat to watching it unfold, to be honest, because you're absolutely nowhere near it. And we can talk about this later, but that happened to me in the final quarter of the grand final as well. Yeah. But look, I think we got to about half time and we were probably 65 points down, and it's going to be extremely tough from there. So probably around half time, or just after that, it's you start to think the worst.
As you mentioned, you roll into 2019, all of a sudden go from a prelim, the natural progression from a prelim to grand final, which was probably the expectation, and you go to 17th on the ladder. Do you know what went wrong there? Can you put a finger on that looking back?
I had very little to play in the 2019 season. I got on the field 5 times, I think, that year. I started off with 2 knee surgeries, got pushed back into the side, played 5 games straight, and then my groins fell apart and then missed the remainder of the season. So I sort of got to sit back and watch it kind of unfold, which is, as you could probably appreciate, when you're losing, you kind of feel like, don't look at me, like I'm not even on the field kind of thing. But it's really tough for a club to kind of go through that, because at AFL level, the whole club feels it. It's not just the players. It goes right through to the admin, the staff, the board and so forth. And yeah, really tough year to be a part of. Really, and I think it reminded a lot of the players that were senior heads of what it was like being there sort of 8 years ago, which they thought they were past. So I guess like my experience of that year was just kind of sitting back, kind of dealing with my own rehab, but really just wanting the year to be over, from a personal point of view, but a team point of view. So definitely one to put behind me.
You're right. It was a tough year running the socials as well. a bit of abuse.
The end of game post final score, and just waiting for the trolls to come through.
Yeah, interviewing blokes after losses isn't too fun either.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Roll
into 2020. We sort of spoke about it just before we jumped on air. The hub was one of the most unique experiences probably any person will ever have. Yeah. I remember the Richmond game at the MCG. Everyone brought their suitcases, stick them on the bus. You play a game, you jump on the bus, drive to the jet base. We're on a flight to Sydney, thinking that it's only going to be 5 weeks in Sydney, which we had to pack for the night before. It turns out it's going to be 3 months, and I think we went to 6 different states. So how did you find that whole experience, playing a game just prior to that, and then the 3 months on the road?
Yeah. It was wild, but everyone's experience was wild, because it was just, it wasn't the normal. Like, at the time, I was borrowing my auntie's car. I had this beat-up Commodore that, at that game against Richmond, I left at the G, and then it actually sat there for 5 months, and that coincided with 3 months in the hubs, but also the off-season, I stayed up in Queensland with my sister for a further 2 months. So, like, if you had told me on that day, like, that car's just going to sit there for 5 months and go flat, I would have just been like, you're joking. But
I did the same. I left my car in there, and I parked that day. It was nearly the stupidest thing in my life. Like, I've gone to park, and I just reversed back, and somehow, so I'm underneath the MCG, and I've just gone directly back without looking, and I've landed between 2 of the most large cement beams in the world, and I've missed them both by like centimetres. I thought, I've nearly completely smashed my car just before going away. No one will be able to fix it. We're in lockdown, and it's underneath the MCG, so it's like, it was the biggest relief for the next 3 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got back there.
But yeah, we got on the bus, off to the airport. For me, everyone's experience is vastly different. I'm a young sort of 25, 26-year-old. I didn't have a partner at the time, didn't have kids. My family's quite spread out. I've got a dad in Adelaide, a sister in Queensland, a sister in Sydney. So apart from leaving my mates, I was kind of like, cool, this feels like an extended away trip. We'll go to somewhere a bit warmer, play some games of footy. No one really knows what's going on in the world, but I've still got my job. I still get to run around. So I was pretty positive and pretty upbeat for the most part of the hub, to be honest. And that extended right through to when we sort of found ourselves sitting in Mooloolaba. I was loving it. I felt like I was on holidays, to be honest. I was in a hotel room overlooking a lagoon. I bought a skateboard, longboard. So did Braden Pruce and Josh Wagner and Neil Bullen, and we're just skating them down to the meals room, just spending sort of hours and hours on end, just feeling time. I felt like it was on school camp, really. And aside from the team itself sort of not doing how we would have hoped, I feel like that period of my life, if I reflect on it, was such a unique but such an enjoyable sort of time for me. I bought a surfboard, tried to learn how to surf, did all sorts of things when I was up there.
Yeah, good experience.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of that season and make the move to the Dogs. It's funny because you spend that whole year in the hub and you get so close to literally every single person. Was it hard to then leave that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the only thing that was kind of stopping me from leaving was the connections and the bonds that I'd made with those mates. Everything else was sort of telling me to leave. There was more opportunity, more years, a bigger contract, the things that people kind of go looking for when it comes to football specific. But I found it really hard to leave some of those guys that I'd just grown really close to. So I kind of knew that during the hub time I was having some phone conversations with the Dogs, the list manager, and sort of it was kind of evolving. And if I'm honest, I wanted to stay at the D's, but they didn't really see it that way. Probably in hindsight, to be honest, the emergence of Bailey Fritsch probably took my spot.
Yeah.
We're very much similar players in that hybrid half-forward role, and he's still rolling around kicking bags of goals. He's an absolute gun, Fritter. So that's probably fair enough. They had him emerging, and it was time for me to move on. So
You touch on the phone calls. People are still so awkward about player movement in AFL. You look at the NBA and these other big leagues, and it's so open and it's just the norm. I think everyone's a bit naive to think that it doesn't happen. How is it going about that, trading clubs when people are awkward about it? Do you feel like it has to be secretive? And
yeah, it is. I feel like when you're closest of close mates within the footy club, they understand it because the AFL existence is a really finite experience and it's a very volatile industry. So you've got to make the most of it, and it's only fair to sort of have an element of selfishness to it because you need to look after yourself and what's best for you moving forward. So I was telling some of my mates in the hub, and they were like, "Yeah, I get it. It's a no-brainer. Go. If I was in the same position, I'd do that." And I feel like a lot of guys probably look at it that way as well because first and foremost, guys want to have the longest career they can. They want to have the most amount of success, both personal and team. But they need to look after whatever they're trying to set up for their own future because when things don't go your way, and in my experience, rupturing my Achilles and then getting delisted, it all ends very quickly and no one really cares too much about it. So maybe to the coaches and stuff, you dance around it a bit, but you let your mates know.
it is a brutal game, brutal industry. Is it hard to be in there and the daily grind as an AFL player?
Yeah, it's just a unique existence. I would call it like a bubble because I first experienced what I would call the real world in my early 20s. I was working at an architecture firm and going to uni and going out on weeknights trying to save every penny. And then you kind of get put in this environment where your life's up on a pedestal, there's cash at your disposal, you get the coolest of opportunities that your mates can't even believe that you get to do that kind of stuff. So, and it begins to become the norm. So, yeah, it's a weird existence, but it comes with all sorts of pressures, that you can only really describe to people if you've lived it, really. With having to perform, having to do the mundane sort of repeat sort of Groundhog Day kind of thing, because every day we're just kind of preparing to play another game of footy, and it happens 24 times a year, and it's just rinse and repeat, trying to get better, trying to review and so forth. And I think most boys probably grow up just it's their life. That's all they want to do. And then you kind of get to a point where you still love the game, but it becomes more of a job. Like anything, when you just sort of dedicate yourself to it for so long, you're appreciative of like what you've got and how lucky you are. But it's definitely tough. It's a tough environment.
Yeah, obviously I've never played, but I've sort of seen it, and it does look like that. People grow up dreaming of being an AFL player, and for some, probably it is the best thing ever. You got like Pendles is playing his 400th game this weekend. I dare say he's enjoyed the majority of his career, but for some, like there are a lot of players that barely even play. They're on a list for a year or two and sort of spat out of the industry. Like, and you talk about the pressures when you do get your chance, you get scrutinised, people want you dropped or whatever it may be. How is that pressure and being in the spotlight?
It's extremely unique. Like, everyone tells you about it before you get into it, and you go, oh, I'll be fine. Like, I'm pretty resilient. I'm pretty rigid. Like, I'll find my way through it. But it's relentless when it happens. I've been on both ends of it, I reckon, where people are just singing your praises. They want to know who you are and they want to pump your tyres. And I've been on the opposite end as well, where they just want you out of the team, like out of their life. Just please disappear because you're making my team worse. And yeah, it gets pretty intense at times. Guys manage it in different ways. I always found it reasonably sort of easy to manage. I just kind of switched off from socials and tried to focus on my role as a half forward, which is a bit of a graveyard at times, to be honest. Like, internally you try and seek this praise for unrewarded running and tackles and 1%ers, but externally people just see a stat sheet of 7 possessions and they just say, like, get the man out of that team. But that's the role of a half forward, and you take the good with the bad. But yeah, I can see why a lot of guys, it can be a lot to deal with.
Did you have to stay away from socials? Did you read a lot of the comments and get a lot of messages? It's getting even worse now with people's multis and things like that.
Yeah.
But how did you go with that?
Oh, you soak it up at the start, like I said, because everyone sings your praises and you read it and it feels good and it's all new. And then you start getting a little whiff of some of the negativity, and you like your innate response is to fire back and be like, are you serious? Like, who are you? Or have some sort of smart ass remark back. But you quickly learn it's really not worth it. There's a mountain of keyboard warriors out there ready to shoot you down. It's just better off just radio silence, taking a break from it, listening to the people that matter. And because at the end of the day, which is where I am now, at the back end of my journey, that's all stopped. And the only people that care are the people that cared about me during that period. So their influence and their opinions were the only ones that mattered during that time.
During your time at the D's, you did have a mental health business going called Mendel. Can you talk to us about the journey with that?
Yeah, so Mendel was a non-for-profit apparel brand. It's an acronym for the words Mending Men's Mental Health, and something I'm extremely passionate about. I've experienced some mental health struggles myself, but also seen it secondhand as well through some family and friends, and it's something that grew really important to me during my adolescent life to prioritise. And whilst I was in the AFL system, wanted to sort of find a platform to be able to give back to the people that sort of may have experienced something similar to myself. So with my sort of design expertise and also a close mate of mine, Mark Losewitz, we came together and wanted to design a brand for all men that was subtle, minimal, but with a nice hidden message behind it, that everyone deserves mental health support, and it could be the sort of conduit between a conversation over a beer or a coffee. So,
have you got any desire to keep anything like that going?
So it's definitely hit a bit of a lull at the moment. It's something we started in end of 2019. We had a great run there for about 3.5 years. We raised close to 30 grand, donated to charity. We did over 130 grand in sales. We hosted numerous events. Did like photo shoots. I was dragging all sorts of mates from the footy club down to those just for a few pro bono shoots. Kay Chandler was one of those. I've had Buku Karmas, Anthony Scott. Josh Wagner was the OG, actually. He's probably still floating around on the website. But yeah, it was something I really sort of immersed myself in for the business side of it as well. I got really interested in understanding the analytics of how to sort of find a profit and turn it and build a business and bottom lines and just trying to work it out. But also the high purpose of, if anything, it probably during that time really helped me in my own mental health in terms of giving me a sense of purpose to be able to sort of focus my attention to making a difference. So it's on the back burner at the moment, but it's a space that I really want to be involved in the future.
I think for a 30-year-old who's just come out of the AFL system, you're probably as well set up as anyone with the experiences you've had through all sorts of life, not just footy, but in the outside world as well. You did say you started your career a little bit later. You're a mature age recruit, which is great now that people do get the opportunity at a different age, not just 18 through the TAC Cup. You were 23. What was your pathway to footy like?
I grew up like a very sort of premature, like I hit my growth spurt when I was about 18, 19, to be honest. Was just underdeveloped and was always a reasonably good footballer, but just kind of wanted to play for fun and play with some mates, to be honest. So I first got my first opportunity after some rep stuff to try it for the Calder Cannons, which is the TAC Cup under 18s, and made it all the way to the end. And they said, "Not today, mate. Like, but you live close to the Bendigo Pioneers. Do you want to go down and try there?" And for anyone that knows TAC Cup, they were like one of the worst teams in that sort of competition. And I thought, I'm a good chance to get on the list here and play some TAC Cup. And then I played one practice match with them, and they were like, "Nah, we're okay without you." So I then folded into the VAFA system. I started playing some under-19s at St Bernard's and got my first pre-season at Coburg. And I was like, oh, cool. Like I could, like, to be honest, AFL wasn't really even on my radar. Like I was just this skinny little blonde kid that could run, and some VFL clubs were looking at me, and I was like, imagine if I could kind of get to a level where I've said I played 10 VFL games. Like how cool, like none of my mates have done this. Coburg didn't want me. I lasted about 2 months there, back to VAFA, then did a pre-season at Essendon VFL, out at the hangar, seeing like people like Zaharakis walking around. It's just such a cool experience. I'm thinking, this is it. This is a proper AFL club. Like I can see the facilities, the people around it. Did the full pre-season. They didn't want me. And I just thought, all right, VAFA's where it's at for me. I need to go back to uni and just do some VAFA. And ended up having a really good year with St Bernard's. Won a Premier A-grade flag, and got the opportunity to join Footscray Bulldogs through a guy called Chad Jones, who was an ex-West Coast player and a forward coach down there, and made the list. And it was there for 2 years. But in my second year, managed to play every game. And I think what probably sort of put me on the map initially was round one that year, and took a big hanger over one of my old mates that I sort of grew up with, Matt Dick, and it sort of went viral a little bit.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, probably put me on the map a little bit, and then from then I felt like I couldn't really miss. So I was playing some good games, and went on to win a flag with Footscray VFL, and then to be honest, I just thought that was probably where it was going to end, but very quickly spoke to 8 clubs, and all of a sudden was drafted. The
2016 VFL Grand Final, that was against Casey. Your whole career is Footscray Bulldogs, Melbourne, Casey, Footscray Bulldogs. It's an incredible journey.
Yeah.
So that game is kind of hilarious. Lin Jong had hurt his collarbone in the Elimination Final against West Coast. Unbelievably got back in time to be available for the granny, which the Dogs went on to win, but didn't get picked. Was best on ground in the VFL. Massive brawl at quarter time, all in. I think Lyndon Dunn had been belting Jong on the collarbone, but is it true he taped the wrong one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I
remember that. Lyndon Dunn was just like a ginormous man. Jongy's just like an outside running winger. We went in with a plan of attack to tape his other shoulder, knowing that they were going to target it. It's a grand final. You want any sort of edge. And they did. They just went for his shoulder. They went for the taped one, which was the one that was structurally sound. And like he's just giving little giggles back. And went on to get best on ground that game. So absolutely worked a treat.
And did you get into the brawl?
I don't think I was. Oh, no, I was in there a little bit. I think there might have been actually a little bit of footage of me grabbing Sam Weeds by the back of the collar and just like throwing him to the ground and just kind of walking away like nothing happened. Like I was pretty light back there. I just kind of wanted my 2 cents in the scuffle, and then that was all I wanted really. So
that is great. So we spoke about the journey, Melbourne Bulldogs. Ironically, 2021, you're in a grand final for the Bulldogs up against the D's. You really can't write that sort of a script.
Yep.
How did you feel going into a game that's obviously the biggest game of your life? Everyone dreams of winning an AFL premiership, but add in the fact you're playing against your past mates from a season earlier.
Yeah. It was almost like euphoric, to be honest. Like it was just such a bizarre set of circumstances. I never thought when I made the move across the Bulldogs, because the year prior both teams were sort of sitting middle of the table, that the following year I'd be up against all my old mates that I spoke about, that I was the one reason I didn't really want to leave because I was so close to them, to be versing them off to play in an AFL Grand Final. So the way I sort of like live through that now is knowing that a lot of like my good mates got to experience that success, and I'm extremely happy for them. But at that time, like that's all you want, and trying to put that noise out of your head when they're talking to you on field, saying hello, calling you Casa from the boundary line when I'm just trying to sort of do my bit to focus in an AFL Grand Final is just like, it was mind-boggling that it happened like that. But yeah, I feel like the experience of even playing in that game is remarkable. I'm like really glad to be able to say I played in that game.
Was it, or it's obviously a dream to win a flag, was it a real motivating factor? Like, players are desperate to play an AFL career and you sort of make your livelihood out of it, but then it gets to a point where you're probably good enough to be cemented in the side and then all you want's a flag. What were you like in that situation?
Yeah, you're right. You start off your journey probably a little bit selfishly, just wanting to play well for yourself. And then I probably got to a point where I felt reasonably comfortable in the team, and you go, now it's time for that success. And for me, I thought about my journey and I was like, this is like what I'm missing. Like, I've had a VAFA flag, how good. I've had a VFL flag. Like, I just need this one. I've kind of like done it all. And so like anyone, like we speak about some of these guys that are playing hundreds of AFL games and don't really even get to play many finals. I felt extremely lucky to have had already a bank of finals and now be playing in an AFL Grand Final. But I so desperately wanted to win that game, absolutely. But it's a team sport for a reason, and there's another 22 blokes out there. I'm just a little cog in the wheel, really, just trying to do my bit. But at the end of it, they were like miles too good to us.
The build-up was unique for that as well. It was not necessarily a hub, but it was a finals hub, 5 weeks in Perth. I think the Doggies, you went down to Tassie and then Adelaide, and you're all over the place.
Yep.
How about the 2 weeks leading up to a grand final? So you've got all that time to actually think about it, because they chucked a little week off in between there, I think in case someone got sick, essentially. How did you go, just sitting there waiting for it to come around away from home and just knowing what was coming?
Yeah. Similar to the hubs. The hubs are just like bizarre when you think about them full stop. But we went down to Tassie and we were greeted by a security guard at like what seemed like a retirement village, wearing genuine like ski goggles. Like we'd come down there with and brought COVID with us. Like he'd done every sort of measure just to kind of make sure that he was going to be null and void from what we were carrying. But we had lockdowns in like a little hotel up in Brisbane where we couldn't actually leave the hotel room for 24 hours. We had like you said, the 2 weeks in Perth. I've got grandparents in Perth. It's almost like we had a little area where we could go for a wander, and it was all fenced off in this big paddock, and it was like a little petting zoo. I went down there and met up with my grandparents on one side of the fence as they sat on the other. Hadn't seen them in 3 years, and just had my first chat to them in a while, like on different sides of the fence. It was just a bizarre existence. But that final week leading into the grand final, we were finally quarantined, and we were able to leave the hub and kind of venture through Perth. And yeah, I felt like we had a really, really good experience and build up towards the grand final.
The game, you stuck in the forward line watching, I guess, the wave of momentum unfold. What was it like sitting there just watching it?
Yeah, sort of probably reminded me of that prelim in against West Coast.
Same stadium.
Yeah, same stadium, same end of the grounds. Really, just knowing the capabilities of Track and Clayton and Jack Viney, but then also knowing that like Tom Liberatore and Bont and so forth at their best, and adds that it was going to be such a good fight. But I just watched them streaming out of the midfield, kicking goals after goal after goal, and just kind of looking up at the scoreboard, obviously, and just kind of this sinking feeling, obviously knowing that it's slipped away. And it's like you try and stay focused when you're in the game, but like when it gets to a point where you know it's done and it's just kind of junk time a little bit, yeah, it's really like, it was quite upsetting. I got quite emotional. I think a lot of guys did as well, realising the significance of the game and the opportunity that we let slip.
I hadn't thought of this question prior to coming on, but I just thought of it now. In the aftermath, obviously, there was the massive Freed from Desire story of the nightclub.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you were at the nightclub, and
Yeah.
as you're friends with the D's boys, how did that unfold from your perspective?
That was like our theme song, Freed from Desire, for the whole finals campaign. Every time we'd won a game, we were in the locker room, banging the lockers, singing it to the top of our lungs, and then I think they sort of, did they sing it after their game? They sort of like, leaves a bit of a bitter taste, but go on, you've just won the AFL Grand Final, you can pretty much do what you want. But that little nightclub saga, look, there's not much to it, to be honest. I think it got built up a lot more than what was actually happening. But essentially it was a two-story with a bit of a balcony. The Bulldogs guys and myself were sort of in this sort of booth area. The Ds were upstairs, but we were kind of coexisting kind of at the bar and coming down and having chats and so forth. But I actually think it might have been Harmsy sort of throwing, funnily enough, he's at the Dogs now, throwing bits of ice off the balcony, trying to lob them at us into our drinks, or I actually don't know what he was doing, but I think it sort of rubbed a couple of guys up the wrong way, but nothing really eventuated. It just kind of, it all got sorted out.
It sounds like it would be Harmsy.
It's a Harmsy thing to do.
Yeah, very ironic. It was obviously, that's a low point of your career, the grand final. Have you got a best game, like a few favourite memories of your time in footy? Like,
Yeah. The game before the grand final, we played in Adelaide against Port. My dad lives in Adelaide. I had him there. I think he was about 10 beers deep in his rain jacket, just like hurling a Bulldogs flag. It's the first time I've seen him go full nuff before. But I kicked 3 goals 3 and had a pile of the ball, and we had a 60-point win to put us into the granny. That was one of my favourite games to be a part of. And then also there's another game that I love just purely because I have this vivid memory of it. But we played St Kilda at the G one day in home and away in 18, and kicked a couple of goals late in the fourth, back to back, and then got called to come to the bench. And I just remember that, like, the MCC and the fans just like standing up and like clapping me off as I was running to the bench, and I just kind of like stopped and took a moment to kind of realise what was happening. Just a home and away game, which went on to go and win, but that my role in kicking a couple of goals and that reaction really instilled like a fond memory in me.
you talk about the role at half forward a little earlier and how unrewarding it can be at times. I remember in 2020 you were one of those pressure players, which it's probably the worst job in footy.
No,
where
it's
you
an
just,
absolute graveyard.
you're rewarded for pressure acts, which people don't care about. You have to tackle inside 50. You don't get a lot of the ball. How was that role?
Look, it's unrewarded, but if you've got the right team and right coaches around you, it's rewarded in a sense. You just have to realise your position in the team and what you can bring. In hindsight, I played so many positions across my time in footy. I even had Bevo playing me in the ruck for about 6 weeks there. But it's a tough one, that one. You just need to make sure that the work that you do off field to kind of get better at your game in terms of like watching your coding and where to run and how to help the team is applauded when you're able to do it on game day, because the stats are very rarely there.
Yeah. How much study and work behind the scenes do you do as an AFL player? And you talk about the coding and watching games, watching other teams' games. How much time do you dedicate to the craft?
It varies player on player. Depends how studious you are, I guess. A lot of guys would probably just go and see their line coach and get their tick off of watching their own clips and getting some RFIs for where they can do better and a bit of praise for what they did good. But a lot of the students of the game, I did this very early on in my career when I was trying to learn the craft. We'll go in and watch Vision. I was watching a lot of Vision of Chad Wingard back in the day, even Tom Lynch from the Crows, and how they went about it as that kind of hybrid half-forward role, and just kind of working out where they run, why they run. And you'll probably find that in some of the top-tier midfielders as well. They're not just kind of watching their own highlights package on a Monday morning on the computers. They're sitting down, they're watching others and how they go about it, just looking for that little edge to how to get better.
Last one for you. It's the Mitch Hannan Cup Friday night, D's Dogs. Are you watching much football? Have you got a prediction? What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm obviously a huge Riley Sanders fan now. I always tune in when he's playing. He was sort of rested on the weekend, so I'm hoping he gets back in and he's playing this weekend. Dogs are flying at the moment. D's are struggling a bit. But probably at my heart of hearts, I'm still a D supporter, so I hope they get up.
Good to hear. Mitch, really good to chat. Really appreciate you coming on. Good luck with everything that life holds after footy.
Thanks, Benny. Appreciate it, mate.